All right, the time has come round, and here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown, and whether you're new to the show today or you're a returning friend, you've decided to listen, and I want to acknowledge that and express my gratitude. Welcome and thanks. I'm wondering how things are with you. I don't know about anyone else, but I've been finding it increasingly more difficult to fend off deep feelings of dread or hopeless feelings because there's a strange mix that I observe in my own experience and what I can observe of others right now, where there's like a relief that things are definitely better. The shock and awe of pandemic years is in a rear view mirror. And so in some regards, it feels like definitely better, at least not like in a constant state of triage anymore. However, despite all of the getting on with it that's happening, there seems to me to be a very high level of anxiety that's just percolating underneath. And it kind of comes out here or there in people's behaviors and in my own. It just seems like things feel both better and still challenging in ways that can darken one's spirit easily. And we don't like to talk about that because we want to keep our minds focused. And I agree, the whole practice for me these days is making sure that I'm not letting all of these external inputs that are just inducing anxiety in me, not letting those external inputs override the whole system, that there's internal inputs that I have intention around, that I do activities, I have practices and kind of rituals that help fend off those feelings that are coming from all kinds of external places. And I suppose that's why we're into yoga, right? That's, I think, what yoga has a lot to do with. And the challenge of practice these days, for me at least, seems to have a lot to do with my ability to function in the world and take care of my family. And that requires a lot of discernment. Just trying to know what the hell's going on, what the right thing to do is. And you know what? There's maybe a little bit more to be said on that, but we should save it till the other side of today's talk with Andrew Eppler. Because Andrew and I have a wonderful consideration of a lot of the things that I've been kicking around here on the show. We also get to learn about BNS Iyengar. And if you don't know who BNS Iyengar is, you'll know more about him today. I won't tell you exactly how this conversation came about here because I share it with Andrew at the beginning of our talk. So I'll leave it till there. But just to say that I didn't really know who BNS Iyengar was until more recently, and learning about him certainly tied into a lot of the other history and philosophy, as you'll hear, that I've considered around Krishnamachrya and Desikachar and other students of Krishnamachrya. So for those of you who are very interested in where yoga comes from and the different styles and traditions and how they kind of come together, well, Andrew made a documentary called the Mysore Traditions, and he was a perfect person for me to talk to about a range of different things. So it was wonderful to get a chance to meet him and connect with him. And it is my pleasure to share it with you today. Real quick before we get to that, I do want to mention that I have some upcoming live events happening in Manchester, England, September 23rd and 24th, and in Dublin, Ireland, September 30th and October 1st. If you are anywhere in the vicinity, do come. I would love to see you. If you don't live in Manchester or Dublin, there's still lots of ways for us to connect. There's a full range of options, from getting deeper into the podcast with the Podcast Premium all the way to my year-long teacher training program, which is still currently, yes, 50% off until the end of this month. So you still have a little bit of time to get that deep discount on the training if you're interested in that. There's also lots of other stuff in between. You can find all of my stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all. We've got a lot of wonderful things to get to today, so I would like us to do that. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Andrew Eppler. Hello, are you there?
Yes, hello, namaste.
Namaste. Hi, Andrew. I'm Jay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Jay. Thank you so much for having me today.
No, it is really my pleasure. And I am already recording, so let's consider ourselves having just begun, okay?
Okay, fantastic.
Oh, good. Well, I am really glad to have this moment to talk with you. I really appreciate you giving me the time. And what brings us together is a little bit of a convergence. Let me tell you a story as a way to get us started today and to introduce everybody listening to some things that I want to talk about. I know in getting ready to speak with you, saw the movie that you made on the Mysore Traditions, and I know you're someone like me who's studied and delved deeply into like the origins of things and the Krishnamachrya tradition. So there's like a lot that we can talk about today.
Good.
But first, there's the original reason that I reached out before I started getting ready to talk to you. And it comes from in 1998, I spent 3 months in India. And during that 3 months in 1998, I spent a week in Mysore. And at the time, we wanted it, wherever we went, I would try to find somewhere I could like have a practice, but we weren't staying for long, you know? And I had practiced, you know, the Iyengar method and Ashtanga vinyasa as taught by Patabi Jois in New York before I made the trip to India. But you couldn't just drop in for a practice at Patabi Jois's shala, you know. And I don't remember who I spoke to, but I asked if someone could tell us another shala that we might be able to go in and just like have a practice or two. And someone sent us to a shala. I don't remember where it was, but we had at least 1 or 2 practices there. And I remember asking someone like what the shala, who the shala, like what tradition or lineage it was aligned with. And they said, this is the shala of BNS Iyengar.
Uh-huh.
And I had never heard of that before. I was very confused. I had heard of BKS Iyengar, but not BNS Iyengar. And I also was smart enough to know that the name Iyengar is somewhat common, if I'm not mistaken. Like it's not, it wouldn't be unusual for there to be more than one person with the same name Iyengar, but not be related.
Oh, yeah.
And I do remember, though, from the practice that we did, that the practice seemed to me to be more closer to like what Patabi Jois was teaching, what I was more well, I mean, I studied both, but what I was practicing at the time, but it wasn't exactly the same. Like it wasn't the same primary series that I had learned, you know? So in any case, all of that's to say, I haven't heard of anything about BNS Iyengar since then. I think I basically forgot it until very recently when I was talking with our mutual friend, Deva Caldwell. Shout out to Deva.
Yes,
And
David, thank you so much.
yeah, shout out to David, because she was talking about you and said BNS Iyengar, and I was like, wait a second. So maybe you can start for us saying something about who BNS Iyengar was and who his teachers were, and then maybe how you found your way to him.
Absolutely. I found my way to him kind of like you did. I was in India and looking for a place to study in Mysore, and I had more time, but I didn't have a lot of money. I was just basically a backpacker. I don't even know if I had a ticket back to America at that time. And somebody had told me great things about him, so I went and found him at Parakala Mutt, there by Jagan Mohan Palace, and he just captivated me right away. He's very unflattering. What information can I get for you? He's very gruff at first. What do you want? But he had these sparkly eyes and this great humor, and I just fell in love with the guy. We spent, I think, a month that first time studying with him. And BNS Iyengar, it has no relation to BKS Iyengar. As you said, Iyengars they're a subcaste of Brahmins, and we could get into more of their roots later on. Krishnamachrya himself was actually an Iyengar. But they're very scholarly and very much connected to Vishishtadvaita and the yoga tradition of Mysore. So I didn't know any of that at the time. I just liked BNS because he would take time and he would talk to me. He spoke good English, good enough. And we would have these amazing talks every day after yoga class about God and yoga and philosophy and why you should be a good person, etc. And by the end of that month, I just felt like I had found something really special. And it wasn't that I didn't want to study with anyone else, but I really wanted to study with him. So every time after that, when I went back to India, I would always go to Mysore and study with him. And I took all of his courses over the course of, 25 years back and forth. And I actually had Guruji BNS, as I call him, visit me in Oklahoma and teach in my school for a month. That was a crazy experience. He's very different when you take him out of India and you take him out of the class setting. We sat and ate mangoes together in my living room, and it was sort of like having South India explode in my home. And it was great. I wouldn't trade that for anything. It was a chance to really get to know him much, much better. But yeah, that's a little bit about how I found Guruji BNS and how I originally started to study with him. And it's an ongoing relationship, of course, and friendship. He is 96 now. I believe he is, as far as I'm aware, he is the eldest living teacher of Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga in the world. And he studied primarily with Patabi Jois, but there were 4 years prior to that where he studied with Krishnamachrya. And he comes from that old Mysore school. And his asanas, there are some slight differences in the vinyasas. They're immaterial. I think the biggest thing is he steps left instead of right. And like all Indian teachers, he'll yell at you and kick you out if you don't do what he says. And so a few minor little differences, but really it is primary series and very much Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga.
I see. And had you ever heard him talk about why he made those changes or why there's those little differences?
Well, it's tricky because if you start questioning him, he sometimes as a challenge. But okay, the step to the left thing we've talked extensively about that, and it comes to Prakriti and Purusha and the philosophy of Ida and Pingala Nadi, which are things I'm sure you're very familiar with. The right is divine and the left is demonic. I heard him say to this girl once who started questioning him, he said, "Are you with God or the devil?" And that, he's like that. He's very fiery and he's very literal. And but anyway, stepping to the left, it has some energetic differences, no doubt. You're using the right foot as the pivotal point, and the left is moving around that, and that is symbolic of Purusha being stable and unchanging, and Prakriti moving around it, etc. But the most practical thing about it is that if your students step to the left, and then they're going to do the right side of every pose first, they're looking at you when they do the right side. If it's two lines facing each other, they're all looking at each other.
It's a logistical matter, really.
To me, that's the best thing about it. And if I'm in a group of people who are going to step to the right, I step to the right. It's no big deal. But that's how he taught, and that's what we do when we're studying in his classes. And I teach like that because it's practical.
Well, that's interesting. For one, it's interesting that you mention having conversations about philosophy, or that the reason you step the foot is Purusha Prakriti, because when I've talked to people who study with Patabi Jois, a lot of them say that never happened, that it was just doing asana stuff, that there never was like a lot of conversations about philosophy.
Yeah.
Did you study other approaches, or has BNS been your guide since the beginning, or have you explored other teachers and approaches as well?
I've always been involved in Ashtanga Yoga, primarily, but I've studied with a number of different Western teachers. Cliff Barber was my first teacher. I spent time with David Williams and Nancy Gilgoff and David Swinson, and but it's always been Ashtanga, and well, then I started going to Eastern Europe and studying Hatha Yoga with different people there. I love yoga, and I've been doing it for quite a while, and I'm open, and I try everything I come across pretty much. But I started when I was 14 with Ashtanga, and that's kind of always been my foundation.
Right. I mean, I guess I wonder, because I know that you, and I've had a number of conversations recently where people wanted to kind of expand the definition of what, Krishnamachrya yoga is, because it is interesting the way that, like, what Desikachar taught, who's a teacher I'm very inspired by, it's very different than what Patabi Jois taught in terms of like breathing and moving practices.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say Ashtanga Vinyasa, are you specifically referring to the series, the set sequences? Or are you referring to like Patanjali's Yoga Sutras? How do you decide? When you say Ashtanga Vinyasa, what do you mean by that?
Well, when you say Ashtanga, I mean, that's pretty loose, right? Because
it's a big umbrella. It's a big umbrella. Yeah.
It can all go back to Yoga Chitta Vritti and Rodaha, and you could say that Patanjali is the author of the yoga concept. But when you say Vinyasa, then you're really pointing at Krishnamachrya and the yoga that came out of Mysore. And as best I've been able to understand it, vinyasa is a term that Krishnamachrya actually coined. Vishesha nyasa. Nyasa is a common word to place something, but vishesha or vivida is like a particular or a correct way of placing. And Basically, yeah, I'm talking about primary series. I'm talking about Ashtanga yoga that everybody would know as Ashtanga yoga. And the yoga of Mysore definitely, there was a broader range of asana practices and hatha yoga techniques that were being taught and practiced there, especially by Krishnamachrya. But long story short, Krishnamachrya created vinyasa. Patabi Jois created the primary series and intermediate series that we know today. And now
you think that he created it? It wasn't found on a papyrus leaf?
No.
Is that a blasphemy? Are you allowed to say that?
I'm allowed, yeah. You can throw stones at me for sure. That's fine. I love yoga, and I, like everybody, I would like to validate myself with antiquity. I want to know what's old about this yoga, and I want to be connected to an ancient tradition, and I've worked at that, but you can't ignore the facts. First of all, the Kurunta has never really been looked at properly. Maybe we found it, but probably not. There's this Hathabhyasa Padati that Jason Birch discovered, but it wasn't discovered in Mysore. And that's a whole story.
Mm-hmm.
But Patabi Jois never provided that, or he could never show it to his students. He always referred to it, and he always said that this is 5,000 years old. But everything that's old is about 5,000 years old. It's just
yoga is 5,000 years old. Yeah.
Absolutely. But primary series is about 70 or 80 years old, actually.
Mm.
And, I have the original syllabus that he gave to my teacher, Cliff Barber, in the 1970s. And it is exactly that. It's a syllabus. It's a college syllabus, and it has to do with his 4-year college course in yoga at the Maharaja Sanskrit College. And year 1 was primary series. And there were other, texts associated and some pranayama. And then year 2 was intermediate. 3 and 4 were the advanced series. And that's, as best I've been able to decipher, where those sequences came from. Now, what's old about it, and so then you have people like Mark Singleton and who would argue that, well, this yoga is very, very modern, and
that's calisthenics, like whatever, Norwegian calisthenics or something, right?
Exactly. Well, there is all that.
Yeah.
Okay, so vinyasa is based on Ashtanga Namaskara. And it's this prostration to the sun business. Mm. And Surya Namaskar is old. It's mentioned in Rig Veda, and it's, part of the rituals to Surya, who is essentially the icon of Prakriti, in a sense, of Purusha. And the sun being the icon of Purusha, Narayana being, the deity that presides, and all of these kind of deep connections from Krishnamacharya's religious and spiritual lineage were woven into this vinyasa practice. And, so he used vinyasa to stick together all of these postures.
Mm-hmm. Isn't there vinyasa krama as like a principle of getting to what you need to do with the practice, depending on who the person is or whatnot? Like, isn't that
absolutely?
Yeah. So that was been there. And is the word, when do you think that vinyasa came to mean breath and movement together specifically?
Probably in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
I think that Krishnamachrya used that word to describe his approach to asana practices that he was using while he was in Mysore. You touched on it yourself. Like, if you look at what he wrote and all of the yoga that he taught through his life, that Krishnamachrya taught through his whole life, we can say that Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga is a relatively small piece of that overall picture. And he taught lots of different stuff. But the context of that was that he was asked to teach a rigorous style of yoga that highlighted the prowess of India's youth and that could compete with foreign styles of exercise. So my personal belief, and it's arguable, everything can be argued, but I don't think he like stole all their techniques and used exactly what they were doing, but he borrowed the concept of this is a form of exercise. We want it to be comparable to other forms of exercise. That alone was a huge innovation. Prior to that Mysore concept of that yoga should be available for householder people and it should be made available in the community, which was really kind of from the Maharajas, from the Wadiyar kings. They're the ones that wanted that more than anybody. But prior to that, yoga was a whole deal. You had to shave your head and renounce material life, and it wasn't a part-time gig.
I mean, isn't that interesting? I heard you talk about like the difference between the yoga of Patanjali and the yoga of what the Bhagavad Gita is communicating. And I guess that's an interesting question. I've had scholars on here, debating the meaning of, Nirodha. and it seemed to me that, some people contend that Patanjali's yoga was not a way of living in the world, but Krishnamachrya and certainly his son Desikachar utilized Patanjali's Yoga Sutras to teach a yoga that was about living in the world.
Yeah.
And some people, I guess, sort of feel like, I guess from a scholarly point of view, they wish they're like, I've heard someone use the term intellectual dishonesty around it or something. And I heard other people say, like, if they're teaching good stuff, what does it matter? Because I guess it's not the intent of the author. But see, I've also had people come on the show and say, oh, well, some people think that the commentary was written by Patanjali, and students of Desikachar say that they were taught that it wasn't. And that, it seems like there's a lot of different interpretations. And I guess, in your mind, do you think, I guess the one that I've heard the most is that they're actually using like kind of like a tantric overlay. But you're saying that Krishnamachrya had like a very religious bent. So wouldn't that be coloring the way that he's teaching yoga as well?
I think very much. The two ways that you can try to look into the background of yoga from Mysore, one of them, the most obvious thing is the postures. Where are these postures from? How old are they? How do we know? How can we trace these postures? And that's where everybody went. But when I made Mysore Yoga Traditions film, and I met all these amazing teachers and scholars and spiritual leaders, I learned certain things that really started changing my interest. One of the main ones was that Krishnamachrya was an Iyengar. And so then I immediately wanted to know, what's the Iyengar thing? Well, who are these Iyengar people? What do they do? And then the other way,
BKS was his nephew, right? Isn't that right?
Yes, I believe that's right. But okay, so the other way you can try to trace yoga in Mysore is what were the spiritual views and practices of these people who gave us these asanas. And if you think yoga is really just about postures, then it makes sense to trace the postures. But if you think that maybe there's more to yoga than postures, then it makes sense to try to understand a little bit about the beliefs and worldviews of the people who gave us this yoga, as well as the poses. And when you do that, you come to Vishishtadvaita philosophy, and Nathamuni Sampradaya is the tradition that Krishnamachrya came down through. And
would that be represented by Ramanuja in Vedanta?
Yes, totally.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Iyengars all can trace their lineage to one of 74 different priests, which were appointed by Ramanuja roughly 1,000 years ago. And those guys were all called Iyengar, and it means the keeper of 5 rituals. So they were all taught those 5 rituals, and they all kept those in their families. And everybody who has the name Iyengar, or who is the descendant of one of those families, they can trace their spiritual heritage back to that. And there's one particular person, priest, let's say, there's another name in Sanskrit, but one particular guy called Anantacharya, who was one of Ramanuja's favorites, and he is the individual who created the line that a lot of the Mysore people belong to, and that Krishnamachrya belonged to. And so that is the last unbroken lineage of Iyengars. That's what I'm told. So I've tried to learn as much as I can about it. It's all very much connected to Melkote. Have you heard of Melkote? It's like a village about an hour and 20 minutes from Mysore. And I do a retreat there every year now, just to spend time in those temples.
It's very interesting to me. I mean, because as I've been coming to understand, like, what distinguishes like Ramanuja from Shankaracharya is pretty significant. And I guess I wonder, like, I've heard people, I don't know if you would know anything about this. This might just be conjecture, but I've heard people speculate that, Desikachar, he was influenced by the Krishnamurti's son. And at the beginning, like, wasn't interested in like the religious aspects, like didn't want his dad to teach him about God. But then later in life, he became more interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess even when you talked about BNS and you said that, is it divine or is it demonic? I mean, I have to say, I've been asking everybody who comes on here and talks about non-duality specifically about evil.
Good question.
For that very reason, because that it does seem to hinge on it. And just for you to understand where it's coming from, I've kind of held this more like radical, I've fancied myself more of this radical non-dualist who didn't really think of God in any kind of like creator way. It was more like some kind of impersonal force of intelligence, like a universal consciousness or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very kind of impersonal force in some regards. But then I had some life experiences that I've compared to like these moments where I'm on my knees, where like I'm thrust into Ishvara Pranidhana in a new way, I felt the presence of something, And so I've been asking people about that, and it does seem like, yoga was sort of like a lot of us came to it to get away from the religion of our parents. I know you have like a Christian background.
I do. Yeah. I come from a whole family full of ministers.
So, it's interesting to me that we, I don't know about you, but I guess you found a yoga that still had God. Cause I found a yoga that was kind of a philosophy where there were, I am God, Atman and Brahman are the same.
Yeah. Yeah. They are really like very similar concepts.
It's a subtle line, right? It's still non-dual, but there's some distinction there maybe. Yeah.
Well, there's a big distinction with, Shankara's philosophy and Ramanuja's philosophy. And Shankara was debating with Buddhists. And so his philosophy is very much aligned towards Buddhism. And the world is an illusion. One of the biggest fundamental differences is that Shankara said the world is an illusion, and Ramanuja said the world is real. That's like night and day. I mean, and you can build a great case for either point of view. You could say that, the rock is hard. It hurts when it hits your head. It's real. But you could also say that all of your attachments and delusions are not real. It's an illusion. Give it up.
Yeah, it's just a perception that there's boundaries there, right? Yes.
Yeah, qualified non-dualism basically, they say that, yeah, you're God, but you're only a little part of God. You can hold a candle and say this is the same thing as the sun, but it's not equal to the sun. It's little. And so they draw that distinction. And
there's something bigger than you. There's something bigger than
you.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's actually one of their main points, is that you are a tiny, tiny thing in comparison to the vastness of what is. And to think that you can manipulate and control nature, I mean, we all have a plan. We're all trying to make a living. We're all trying to do whatever it is we're doing. But the most logical approach, according to Vishishtha Advaita and Bhakti, is that a spiritual aspirant should surrender to this great mystery and say, look, I'm just a small piece of everything that is, and I'm trying to do the right thing. I trust and hope that I'm going to be taken care of somehow, and I surrender.
You humble yourself at the feet of the Lord.
That's it. So this surrender thing, I think I've been working a lot with, in my own thought, but surrender is dangerous because
you got to know what you're surrendering to, right? You could be surrendering to.
Exactly. There's that. And in English, the word surrender means that you stop fighting.
Yeah, and give up or something, or
you give up. You're supposed to mellow out in some sense, But it also means you have to surrender all your excuses and all your baloney stories we tell ourselves about why we're not necessarily needing to do the things that we know we should do. It's all a process. Surrender means you're supposed to actually jump in there and do the right thing and really radically, pursue your practice. It also means surrendering to, the will of the divine, which if we would really listen to that divine voice inside of ourselves and do the things that we know we're supposed to do, that's a lot of work. That's, it's much easier to ignore.
I heard someone say, I've been having these conversations in these teacher sanghas that I have. And someone said, if I believe in God, then I have to do the right thing.
Well, yeah.
Which then means that there is a right thing and a wrong thing. And it has to be discerned, and there has to, or be learned, there has to be moral codes.
That's it, yeah, and that's tricky. I mean,
it's tricky, yeah.
You can say, and I don't have any desire for making other people to think the same way as me, or
not to be dogmatic on others or something, right?
Yeah, that's what I really hate about Christianity is the dogma and the hypocrisy and this fundamental view that everybody else is all screwed up. We have the only real way, and everyone should follow what we're doing. You're not okay until we tell you you're okay, and we can revoke your okayness if you step out of line. But you know what that all reminds me of, because I grew up in the Midwest and I grew up in all that kind of culture. That's kind of like the hardline Ashtanga approach. We have the only real yoga. You're not a real yogi until we tell you you're a real yogi. You have to do exactly what we say, and as soon as you stop doing that, you're not a real yogi. And what a bummer! I don't think that that's Indian. That's a mirror from our own Western cultural programming, and Indians don't really think like that. Actually, it's much more about, well, we're all suffering in this world. Figure out what you can. If you believe in God, great, follow God. If you don't believe in God, follow self-realization. And everybody can respect everybody's views. And, we don't all have to believe the same thing, but it's good if we are thinking about that stuff. And that's what I think is good in the yoga community, is that we should all kind of have these conversations like you and I are now.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the reason why I love yoga, as you said you do too, is because it does seem to me at its fundamental core to be where human beings have inquired into the nature of self and existence and reality since the beginning of forever or whatever. And I think that there's a very inherent impulse within some people or within humanity to inquire into those things. I would say it's interesting because I was raised in like a sort of, I guess what they would call conservative Jewish household in the 80s, but it's not conservative in the way that people think. It was actually very like hypocritical and kind of full of shit. But like, I think I don't have any connection to Christianity or Jesus the way other people who are raised into it do. But I've been reading the Bible recently, and it seems like when you talked about that idea about Christianity being we only have the one right way, that's like one interpretation of Christianity, it seems to me, in a sense, in a similar way that Patanjali's Yoga Sutras can be read in all these different ways. In some respects, when I read the teachings of Jesus without all of that other stuff, and he's just talking about what BNS was talking about, like, listen, if you go that way, you're basically serving the devil. That you eat from the tree of knowledge, right? And what is the knowledge? The knowledge allows you to know what God knows, or to be like God, or to do what thou wilt. And in a way to go against the harmony of the garden or something. And in a way, that's what we're doing in the society, it's like we're building this Tower of Babel or something. So I don't know, it seems interesting to me that I can find like what are like biblical prophecy in yoga teachings as well.
Absolutely. I have the opinion that even if, like, okay, we're just from a Christian culture, and I mean, or a Jewish culture, but they have the same kind of cultural roots in some sense. It wires you up in a particular way, and it's very hard to escape from your cultural programming. Even if you say, I hate all organized religion, I hate Christianity, I don't want anything to do with any of that stuff, get it away from me, I'm allergic to it, it's toxic, whatever. You're still brought up thinking in certain ways, and all that stuff goes super deep, and it works its way into your worldview, even though you try to keep it out. And my approach personally, I mean, I love my family, and I have all these old preachers in my family, and they don't like yoga. They don't like long hair.
Do they think it's satanic? Do they think you're doing the devil's work?
They used to. but the thing is, they like me. They like me anyway, and they like me because I'm respectful and I'm interested in their spiritual views, and I'll sit there and talk to them about it for hours, and they like that. And most people, at least in our family, aren't really that interested in any of that stuff. It's a very materialistic culture and time, and most people are interested in, they want to talk about the movies that they've watched, and social media, and the kind of car that they want to get, and just all this regular, very ordinary blah blah stuff. And not that many people of any religion actually are thinking about God all the time and really trying to work out the nature of reality. And that's a yogi kind of a thing to do, but it's not unique to yoga. It's cross-cultural, and there have always been people who have thought like that. And I think that yoga, what Guruji BNS always said, yoga should be taught in a way that transcends language and culture, social class, and religion. It shouldn't be so dogmatic that it alienates people who have a different culture or social class, etc. And so that's how I try to teach it and understand it, is that it's for all humanity. It's a gift, and you can believe in God or not. Whatever your deal is, fine. If you're a Christian, be a Christian. If you're Hindu or Islamic or whatever your cultural, your religious culture is, fine. But don't be shallow. Go in there and figure it out. Ask yourself what's the truth, and then we can have these.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.